She got herself up the porch steps one at a time. Her left hand braced against the railing, her right gripping the carpet bag that held everything she still owned in the world. The last step cracked beneath her boot. She stopped, steadied, then knocked. No answer. She knocked again. 3 hard raps, the kind that meant she was not going away. The door opened 4 inches. One eye, brown, suspicious. "I'm not buying anything," the man said. "I'm not selling," Nora said. "I'm the woman you sent for." Before this story goes any further, if you've ever known what it feels like to drag yourself somewhere on nothing but the last of your nerve, please subscribe to this channel and stay with me until the end. Hit that notification bell and drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. Every single name means the world. Now come back with me to that porch in Montana, where a crippled widow and a grief-locked mountain man are about to become the most unlikely beginning either of them ever deserved. Her name was Nora Elspeth Crane, and she had been a widow for 11 months, 3 weeks, and 4 days. She did not count the hours anymore. She had tried that in the beginning and found it made the nights longer. Her husband, Gerald, had been a school teacher in Billings. A quiet man, orderly, he graded papers at the same table every evening and put his spectacles in the same breast pocket each night, and when the influenza took him in January of 1882, she had buried him in the frozen ground and returned to their 2 rented rooms and sat very still for the better part of a week. What she had not done was fall apart. She could not afford it. Her left leg had been damaged in a wagon accident when she was 9 years old. The bone set poorly. The muscle never fully recovered. And she had spent her adult life learning the precise economy of her own body. How to move efficiently. How to carry pain without announcing it. Gerald's death had become another weight to distribute, and she had distributed it and gotten back to the business of surviving. The rooms were Gerald's on credit. The school filled his position within the month. She took in sewing, then laundry, then baking, bread and pies, and the kind of dense biscuits that kept a man on his feet through a long day's work. She baked herself into a small reputation in the 3 blocks around their building, and for a time it was enough. Then the landlord raised the rent, and the landlady told her with the expression of a woman delivering necessary medicine that a widow alone was a liability and a talk starter, and perhaps Nora might consider moving on. She had seen the advertisement in the Billings Gazette on a Wednesday. Wanted, a cook and housekeeper. Montana ranch, remote, near Hardin Creek. 1 man, no children. The name at the bottom was Silas Vance. She had written the letter the same afternoon. The stagecoach driver who took her the last 32 miles had a broad face and a habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when he had something to say. He had been doing it since the 2nd mile stop. "You the one going to the Vance place?" he said finally. "I am." He chewed. "You know him?" "I don't." He was a trapper before he took the land. 14 years in the mountains alone, the Bitterroot Range, mostly, came back down 6 years ago when his mother died and left him the ranch. Folks in Hardin Creek say he ain't right comfortable with people. He glanced at her sideways. "That's putting it gentle." "I've met people who weren't comfortable with people," Nora said. "I cooked for them too." The driver looked at her leg, which was braced along the floor of the coach at the angle that put the least strain on the joint. Then he looked away, in the practiced way of a man who had decided he had not looked. She had felt that look her whole life. The inventory. The recalculation. She let it pass through her the way cold air passes through an open window. Noticed. Endured. Gone. The Vance property appeared at the end of a pine track road in the late afternoon of her 2nd day of travel. The farmhouse was sound but cheerless, unpainted boards gone silver with weather, a front porch missing 2 boards, a chimney sending up a thin and reluctant column of smoke. The barn behind it was in better condition than the house. That told her something about the man. She had climbed down from the stage without assistance, which was how she always climbed down from things, and she had made her way up the path and then up the steps, one at a time, her hand on the railing, her carpetbag in her right hand. The last step had cracked. She had steadied. Then she had knocked. Silas Vance opened the door 4 more inches and looked at her in full. He was tall in the way of men who had spent years ducking under things. Dark hair going gray at the sides. A jaw like something quarried rather than born. His eyes traveled from her face to her leg and back up to her face, and if he made any internal calculation, she could not see it. He simply opened the door. "References," he said. She handed him the envelope. He read it standing there, not inviting her in. She stood. She did not shift her weight or make any accommodation to the discomfort of standing that long on a porch step in the November cold. She had learned, young, that showing the effort of something gave certain people the idea that they were witnessing a problem. He handed the letters back. "Can you work on that leg?" "I've been working on this leg for 23 years, Nora said. "I don't require your concern for it." He looked at her for a moment. "Kitchen's through the back," he said, and walked away. She followed him inside. The front room held a table, 2 chairs, a cold fireplace, and 6 years of a man living as though living were only a technicality. A rifle hung on the wall. A single cup sat on the table beside a book, face down, which was the one human thing in the room. He had been reading something, and had meant to come back to it. The kitchen was through a short hall, and she came to the doorway and stood there, and understood immediately what 11 months alone had done to it. The stove wore a crust of burnt matter that was almost archaeological. The basin held a smell she identified as standing water, and something fermented beneath it. Grease had been allowed to migrate freely across every surface for what appeared to be the better part of a season. The flour barrel was open to whatever wildlife chose to make use of it, and several had. "You're the housekeeper, too," Silas Vance said behind her. "Same rate." "What rate?" she said. $50. Month, room and board." She turned and looked at him. "60, she said. "The advertisement said 1 man. This kitchen is the work of a man who has not cleaned anything in the better part of a year. That is extra work, and 60 is the correct rate for it." He was quiet for 4 seconds. "60, he said. Then he walked back down the hall. She set her carpetbag down. She rolled up her sleeves to the elbow. She located the bucket, the lye soap, and a rag that was less offensive than the others, and she began. She had the kitchen to a state of basic dignity in 4 days. The stove required an hour of work with a scraper before she could even assess the iron beneath. The basin needed emptying, scrubbing with lye, and a long airing. She found mouse damage in the flour and the cornmeal both. Walked the 2 miles to Hardin Creek for replacements without comment, and when she returned found that Silas Vance had, without announcement, repaired the 2 broken boards on the front porch. He did not mention it. Neither did she. He appeared 3 times a day for meals and ate with the concentrated attention of a man who had been getting by rather than eating. On the 3rd evening, she made sourdough from a starter she had brought from Billings in a sealed crock, and when she set the bread on the table, the smell moved through the whole house, warm and yeasty and faintly sweet. And he stopped in the doorway for a moment before sitting down. He did not say anything. He ate 3 slices. After supper, he sat slightly longer at the table than was strictly necessary. He had picked up a book, something about the flora of the northern Rockies, and he read it in the kitchen rather than the front room, which was warmer, which was practical. She washed the dishes. He read. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of two people occupying the same space with adequate mutual respect for the other's right to be there. On the 5th day, she found the locked door. It was at the end of the upstairs hall. She had gone up to locate the source of a draft coming through the kitchen ceiling. The floorboards above were warping. She checked both open rooms and found nothing. The third door did not open. A padlock, new enough that the metal had not yet tarnished, placed deliberately. She did not try the lock. She went back downstairs. The house had no woman's things in it. No curtains, no patterned cloth, no books with a woman's name in them, no pressed flowers, no letters tied with ribbon. Whatever that room held was the explanation for all of it. The dirty kitchen, the missing boards, the man who ate like someone who had forgotten that a meal could be more than fuel. That evening a man came to the door. His name was Priest. He worked a claim 2 valleys over, and had the kind of face that smiled often enough that the smile had carved permanent lines, but never reached the eyes. He shook Silas's hand and looked past him at Nora with an expression of prolonged interest she had encountered in men before, and had a practiced method for not acknowledging. "New housekeeper," Priest said. "Mrs. Crane," Silas said. "She cooks." "I can see she does," Priest said, and smiled. Silas's attention moved to him with a quality she had not seen before. Not cold exactly, but definite. He said something in a low voice that she did not hear, and Priest's expression rearranged itself, and after a few more minutes, Priest left. Silas came back through to the kitchen. He did not explain. She did not ask him to. That night more firewood appeared beside the kitchen door, enough for 3 days. She had not mentioned she was running low. On the 17th day, the temperature dropped 40 degrees in 6 hours. She had grown up in Montana and knew what that meant. She spent the morning bringing in the remaining cord of wood from the far side of the barn, the tools that would crack in the cold, the 2 chickens that had not gone into the coop on their own. She was making her 3rd trip across the yard when the wind picked up, and the first snow came in sharp and nearly horizontal, and she was in the open with a full armload of wood, and her left leg was the one that had to push through the first inch of drifting powder with each step. She made it to the porch. She did not make it to the door. The step, a different one, the top one, not the repaired boards, let go. She caught the railing. The wood held, but her hand did not, and she came down on her knee in the porch boards with a sound that she immediately decided no one needed to hear her make again. She did not cry. She gathered herself and began to get up. His hand appeared before she had gotten far. Not offered, placed, his hand under her arm, taking the weight without asking, without comment on the necessity of taking it. She let him. There was no dignity to be preserved by refusing it, and she had long since made peace with the difference between help that diminished and help that simply assisted. He got her inside. He did not make her sit down or offer anything for the knee with the expression of a man who considered himself now responsible for something. He simply moved back to closing the doors against the storm. She put the firewood by the stove and began building up the fire. The blizzard lasted 2 days. On the first night, somewhere past 11 o'clock, she came downstairs for water and found him at the kitchen table with the lamp turned low and a photograph in his hand. He did not hear her on the stairs. The storm was loud, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before she understood that she should not be there. She turned to go back up. Her name was Margaret, he said. She stopped. He was still looking at the photograph. Not at Nora. His voice had the quality of a man who was speaking to the room rather than to a person, saying something that had been held in for a specific number of days. She would count later and arrive at the number 1008, and that had finally exceeded the pressure that could contain it. She died in February of 79, he said. The cold got into her lungs in January, and by February there was nothing to be done for it. I went for the doctor, and the pass was closed, and I came back, and she was gone. I was not there. He set the photograph face down on the table. I keep the room the way she left it, because I have not found a reason to change it that is better than the reason to leave it. The fire cracked. Nora came the rest of the way into the kitchen and sat down across the table from him. She did not say that she was sorry. She did not tell him Margaret was at peace, or that time made a difference, or any of the things that well-meaning people said, and that landed on grief like stones dropped on ice. The intention fine, the impact entirely beside the point. She sat. She was there. She let the room be what it was, which was a room with two people in it who had each survived something alone that would have been better survived otherwise, and she did not make that smaller by summarizing it. The wind pressed against the north wall. After a while he said, "Your husband." 11 months, she said. Influenza. He was a good man. Yes, Silas said. Not sympathetically. As a man who understood that the quality of a person's grief was commensurate with the quality of what was lost, and that there was nothing more accurate to say. They sat there until the fire needed tending. She tended it. He went upstairs. She stayed in the kitchen with the lamp and the sound of the storm and the photograph, face down, until she felt steady enough to sleep. 3 weeks into December, a man named Aldrich came from the land office in Hardin Creek. He arrived on a Monday with a leather satchel and a document that he laid on the table with the manner of a man who considered formalities a courtesy he was performing, but did not necessarily require of himself. He had found what he referred to as an irregularity in the filing on the Vance property. A question about the original deed transfer, the death of Silas's mother, and the presence or absence of a secondary heir. The matter, Aldrich explained, required resolution within 30 days or the land would revert to a territorial dispute process, which was a long way of saying that a man named Harlan Preece had filed a claim on the adjoining valley property and was pressing the dispute, and that the paperwork to resolve it was incomplete and required documents that were, according to Aldrich, missing. Silas said nothing through all of this. His face held the same quality it always held, which was that of a man who had learned not to use his face for anything that might be used against him. After Aldrich left, Nora said, "May I see the document?" He handed it to her. She read it twice. She had not studied law, but she had kept books for Gerald during his years of teaching, which had been administered under a territorial contract, and she had therefore read enough territorial documentation to recognize the difference between something that was genuinely complicated and something that was dressed up to appear complicated for the benefit of someone who did not know the difference. This cites a statute that was superseded in 1878, she said. Your mother died in 1876. The deed transferred under the old statute, which is the one that applies. The missing documentation Aldrich mentioned is not actually required under that statute. It was added in the revision. Someone is hoping you don't know that. Silas looked at her for a long moment. I need to go to Hardin Creek, she said. I need the land office registry, specifically the 1876 volume. And I need a clerk who is not Aldrich. He did not argue with her. He hitched the wagon. In Hardin Creek, the general opinion of Nora Elspeth Crane was formed primarily during her walk from the hitching post to the land office. She was a large woman, had always been a large woman, with a limp that a spiteful person might have called a drag, and a more accurate person would have called a method. She wore her good coat, which was dark wool and fit her well, and she carried the Aldrich document in her hand with the composure of a woman arriving somewhere she had every right to be. She heard the commentary. 2 women on the mercantile steps. A man near the tack shop. She did not break her pace. The land office clerk was 17 years old, had never been tested for anything, and was therefore unprepared for a woman who sat down across from him and placed a specific document on his desk and asked him to locate the 1876 registry volume with the ease of a woman who knew exactly what she was asking for and precisely why. He found the registry. She found the entry. She had him copy the relevant passage in his own hand, dated and witnessed. When she walked back out, Silas Vance was standing at the wagon. He had watched her go in. He had watched the 2 women on the mercantile steps. He had not said anything to either of them because he was a man who chose his moments, and he was choosing this one. "Did you get it?" he said. "I got it." He took the paper from her and read it. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his inside coat pocket. Then he looked at her in a way he had not looked at her before, not as a problem assessed or a capability noted, but as a person standing in front of him in the sharp December light with her cheeks red from the cold and her good coat and her chin up. "Nora," he said. That was all. Just her name. But the way he said it had the quality of something being recognized at last, named correctly, after being called the wrong thing for a long time. From the mercantile steps, the 2 women were watching. "She's with Silas Vance," one of them said. "I know it," the other said. "She must be doing something right up there." "I expect," the first one said slowly, as a woman revising a previous conclusion, "that she's doing quite a lot of things right." Silas Vance helped her up onto the wagon bench. Not because she required it. Because he wanted to. There is a difference, and any woman who has been helped out of obligation versus helped out of choice understands it immediately in her bones. He drove back to the ranch. She watched the mountains. Snow had come down to the timberline, and the peaks above it were the color of cold iron, and the sky above those was the particular blue that only appears in Montana in December. Deep and clear and wholly indifferent to human difficulty in a way that was, somehow, a comfort. Aldrich came back 2 weeks later with Priest beside him. Silas met them on the porch. Nora was inside, but the window was not latched and the voices carried. Priest told Silas that the matter had been referred to a territorial arbitrator who would be coming in the spring, and that in the meantime the wisest course would be for Silas to consider settling privately and avoiding the expense of a formal proceeding. He said it with the same smile he always used, the one that had worn ruts in his face but never reached the eyes. "I have the original deed transfer under the 1876 statute, witnessed and certified by the Hardin Creek Land Office," Silas said. His voice was flat and entirely without heat, the way a fact stated, simply, is without heat. "I also have a record of the filing you made, the date of it, and the statute you cited, which had been superseded for 4 years when my mother transferred this property. If you'd like to explain to an arbitrator how you missed that, that's your business. My business is this land." He paused. "If either of you comes back onto this property, I'll have a statement ready for the sheriff." The silence lasted long enough that Nora could hear the pines. Then the sound of 2 horses leaving at a pace that was not quite a run, but was close enough to make no difference. She was at the stove when he came back in. He hung his coat on the hook by the door, the hook he used, which was 3 inches to the left of the hook she had assigned herself, and he stood there for a moment with his hand still on the coat. "It's done," he said. "Good," she said. He came and stood at the kitchen table and watched her move between the stove and the counter with the precise, unhurried economy she brought to everything, and he said, "I'd like you to stay." She set the bread tin down. "Past the agreed term," he said. "If you're willing." Then, because he was a man who did not dress things up when the plain version was accurate, "I'd like you to stay as more than a housekeeper, Nora, if that's something you're willing to consider." She looked at him. Silas Vance, who had eaten 3 slices of her bread without a word of comment, and had repaired her porch boards without announcement, and had given her his coat on the wagon bench against the cold, who had said her name in the street in Hardin Creek, as though it was a thing of value. "I'm not a small woman," she said. "I'm not a woman without history. I limp and I'll limp for the rest of my days, and there are people in that town who have already decided what kind of picture that makes." "I know it," he said. And he looked at her the way he had looked at the mountains on the drive back from Hardin Creek. Not unmoved, not romantic, but with the recognition of a man who has been in enough wilderness to know the difference between a landscape that will tolerate you and one that will hold you. "And I'm asking," he said. They were married in March of 1883 by the same minister who had registered Margaret Vance's death in 1879. He opened the room at the end of the hall that spring, not emptied, but opened. The window unlatched. Light in. He put Margaret's photograph on the mantelpiece in the front room, where it stayed, and Nora understood this as the most honest thing he could have done. In April, Nora walked into the mercantile on a Tuesday and bought flour and salt pork and a length of blue cotton cloth, and the woman from the mercantile steps looked up and said, "Mrs. Vance," with the careful courtesy of someone who had done a private reckoning and arrived somewhere new. "Mrs. Crane Vance," Nora said pleasantly, and paid her bill. 17 years later, when their daughter Ada asked why her mother was never bothered by what people said, Nora considered it with the seriousness it deserved. "I am bothered," she said. "There are things that land and things that pass through, and the difference is not what's said but what you've decided about yourself beforehand." She set a loaf of sourdough on the table between them, the same starter, 18 years old now, carried from Billings in a sealed crock. "I decided a long time ago. I don't revisit it." Ada pulled the bread toward her and broke it with both hands. Outside the window, the Bitterroot Range sat in its winter silence, large and cold and older than any of them. The smoke from the chimney went straight up in the still air. The ranch was sound. The barn was full, and Nora Crane Vance took up every inch of the life she had built, not because anyone had finally permitted it, but because she had walked herself to a door in the November dark, and knocked until it opened, and that had been, from the very beginning, entirely enough.